And I believe we're live. So, welcome to another episode of the Cyber Spot. I have the great pleasure to introduce my co-host, Tina Gravel, and we have a very special guest today, Joe Peterson, who I don't even think that I need to introduce. You're a celebrity on kind of the cyberspace, and on LinkedIn, I follow your postings. Would love to have a conversation today about kind of Joe's background, a bit of what she's involved with, and then also we're going to be talking about, excuse me, about IoT and micro segmentations, because those are really hot topics these days, and a lot of people are interested in hearing more. So why don't we get started?
Thanks, David. I'll do a little bit more of a little bit more on Joe for those of you that don't know who Joe is. Joe's a VP of Cloud Services for Clarify 360. It's an IT consultancy that's focused on strategic sourcing. She's an engineer by trade. She actually was served our federal government in the armed forces. Joe partners with organizations to navigate the complex cloud ecosystem and security landscape. She's been named a CRN Women of the Channel for many years. I believe she's going on her sixth year now, being named consecutively a Woman of the Channel. She's an Oracle Top 15 People to Follow in Cybersecurity, an Analytica Top 50 Female Cybersecurity Influencer, a Top 50 Female IoT Influencer, a Top 100 Cloud Influencer, an IBM Top 10 Influencer in Hybrid Multi-Cloud Storage. In 2020, Thinkers 360 listed her as one of the top 100 thought leaders and influencers to follow on social media. Joe's a member of the Forbes Technology Council, and she is a founding member of Cloud Girls, which brings me to how I know Joe. Very fond of Joe. She was a person that got me involved with Cloud Girls and started me on my passion for involving women in technology and advancing women in technology. It's kind of interesting. When I first met Joe, I was not as avid or as rabid an advocate as I am now. Joe, how are things going in? I think we've heard what's happened this year with the pandemic for women. What new things are you doing in your fight for women in cybersecurity and technology overall? Any new things that you're involved in or you've heard of? Anything that you'd like to talk about before we get started on micro segmentation and IoT?
Well, Tina, you were an advocate for women. You just didn't know it. You were hiring women, you were coaching them, you were shepherding them along their careers. You just didn't use the hashtag. That's all. So,
That's cool.
yeah, it's
cool.
true.
It's true.
Yeah. So, lots of good things are happening. I'm starting to see that flexibility is becoming more and more important from a corporate perspective about how to retain women. The pandemic has taught us that we can work from anywhere. And the pandemic has also taught us that a lot of work falls on moms. A lot of work falls, in terms of household work, kids with schooling, just household duties, however it works out. Moms have always been great at juggling. And I think that employers are realizing that in order to keep them as part of the workforce, they've got to be just, more lenient in terms of scheduling, right? We've all had to make adjustments and changes. So I think that's all good. And we're all learning lessons. But I'm happy to be here today, and thanks for inviting me.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. I see one of our friends is on, Dina Moskowitz. Hi, Dina. Let's segue into cloud security and the latest things that we're hearing about. So in an effort to bring you guys stories and lessons and to help you with your education, we're going to speak today about IoT and micro segmentation. If you're an expert on this, you may not want to stay on, but I hope you do. You might learn something anyway. Many of you know about this, but it surprises Joe and I when we talk about this topic that so many network executives and security folks don't know about it. They don't understand the value that can be had by employing techniques to secure networks around microsegmentation and implement a strategy to protect themselves with IoT. So, David, I'm going to turn over to you and see if you can start the questions for our illustrious guest.
Yeah, maybe before we even start, maybe we can cover what is microsegmentation. I think that's a key, and kind of dive a little deeper into that, because I think not everybody is fully aware that something like that exists. So maybe we can cover that.
Sure. Tina, did you want to start, or do you want me to sort of jump
Go
off?
ahead. No, go ahead. That's just to explain what why don't you start with like network segmentation in general? I think that would be kind of a good way to start.
Sure. Well, microsegmentation is the idea that in virtual environments, security has become even more granular, and it's right down to the workload level. So if we look at traditional segmentation, that works best on north-south traffic. That is the idea that the client server interacts, and crosses the security perimeter. And in today's hybrid cloud environments, things look a little different. They actually look a lot different. These environments have all but turned around that idea of castle and moat perimeter thinking that we used to have. And one of the reasons is that the traffic flows differently. Most of the traffic is going to flow east-west, server to server, between applications. And so you're really adding more complexity into the mix in this virtual environment. We've got a single server on a VM, for example, that can host hundreds of workloads. So each workload can have its own security requirements. Things get complicated pretty fast.
Yeah, well, and especially I would imagine with IoT devices, all those little devices contacting, and that would be sort of an east-west, wouldn't it? Scenario. It's a server talking to it's a tiny little device talking to maybe not a server talking to a server, but I would imagine you have to keep those separate, don't you, in order to protect your company jewels?
Yeah, I mean, and you said something at the top about why people aren't really making this a big deal yet, and some of them are. There are verticals that have definitely adopted IoT faster than others as tracking devices. So if you look in the oil and gas industry, they've been using it for a bit, right? We're seeing more and more adoption, but it's that whole idea of IT and OT, and those universes are coming together. So
for those, I know that there will be people on here, especially younger folks, that won't know what OT means. Joe, I've been through this. Why don't you define that for our millennials?
Well, it's not even a millennial thing. It's just
okay.
It's just, I don't even think it is. I think it's just environments, right? How environments sort of grew. So if we look at manufacturing technology, or manufacturing environment, that's a really good example of IT and OT. And OT is where, you have IT operationalized pieces of machinery. So maybe the facilities manager or the plant manager might have been responsible for those pieces of equipment for the longest time, and they weren't really IT enabled. They've become IT enabled, meaning they have a public IP address, right? And so they're sitting on the network somehow, some way. And what we have is these two groups within IT coming together and starting to talk about how things are going to work together best for the organization. So that'd be the facilities folks and the traditional IT folks. And maybe that's just a simple answer, but that's kind of how I see it.
So operations technology okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Perfect.
Now, how do we, so as an organization that thinking about doing microsegmentation, maybe you can, since you're an expert in this particular area, how do they go about doing that? And maybe kind of walk us through, when you first talk to a client, what are the kind of the question you ask, and then maybe the follow-up question would that be what that process of microsegmentation look like in actuality, And then what are the benefits? I know it's kind of three questions in one, but what are the
That's a
benefits for the?
lot.
I know. Let's do one
One
place at a time.
at a time.
One
Yeah.
at a
How do you
time.
get started? How do you get started with a client? I'm going to stop you right there. How do you get started? That's the first thing.
Well, you've got to think about you got to think about what problems they're trying to solve, right? That's the thing. If you're really going to help them, you have to think about where are they coming from and what are they trying to accomplish. And for me, it helps to think about three sort of key principles: thinking about visibility, thinking about granular security, and thinking about the concept of dynamic adaptation. So microsegmentation helps provide consistent security across environments, across data centers, across hybrid cloud platforms by using these three principles. So people go, oh, why do we need it when we have firewalls? Well, that's a good question. Back to sort of that east-west, north-south traffic, right? East-west traffic is usually not subject to the firewall inspection, and it's for all practical purposes invisible to the network security team. So to be effective, microsegmentation requires visibility into all network traffic. And while there are several ways to monitor traffic, sort of the hypervisor touches every packet on the network and is therefore very uniquely positioned to provide necessary visibility. That's sort of the first answer to the question. So David, did you want to sort of jump in and talk about the second thing that you wanted
Yeah.
to
So I mentioned
nail on?
that then you meet with a client and they heard that they should be doing this, and they heard that there's benefits of doing this. And when you first meet them, maybe you can walk us through like some of the discovery questions that you do. How do you assess like what their current situation is, and how do you kind of build almost like a roadmap for them to get to where they need to be?
Well, I think about sort of the tenets of a framework and what they're trying to accomplish. So if an organization is looking to adopt microsegmentation, they're really looking at four tangible benefits. They're looking at a reduced attack surface. They're looking at improved breach containment. They're looking at stronger compliance posture, and they're looking at streamlined policy management, right? Those are the four things that they're generally trying to accomplish if they're thinking about putting in microsegmentation. So let me break those down a little bit. If we're looking at a reduced attack surface, microsegmentation is again going to provide visibility into the complete network environment without slowing down development or innovation. And that can be a really big win for enterprises that have large CI/CD pipelines. So application developers can integrate security policy definition really early in the development cycle and ensure that neither the application deployment nor the update is going to create this attack vector, right? Companies are getting very serious about DevOps sec. In fact, we're starting to see that job title emerge. We're starting to see the marriage of DevOps and security come together because this is so important to organizations. The second point would be improved breach containment. This is really coloring outside the firewall lines as they were. So microsegmentation gives security teams the ability to monitor, again, the traffic against some predefined policies, as well as shorten the time to respond and to remediate breaches. And then the third point was stronger regulatory compliance. This is about granular control. So imagine an environment where the regulatory team can create policies that isolate systems subject to regulations from the rest of the infrastructure. Granular control of communication and regulated systems really reduces the risk of non-compliant usage. And if you're a company that is always getting hit up to provide compliance reporting, this is a really great way to sort of isolate environments and be able to produce that report quickly instead of just spending lots of hours and time with the team, sort of repeating the same process again for each client that or each vendor, however that works for you, that requests something from you. You know, maybe it's the state and you've got regulatory compliance, or maybe you've got some other sort of compliance you have to deal with. And then streamlined policy management is the last thing. This is about basically simplification, and it's particularly relevant when we look at firewall policy. Firewall policy can get crazy, it can really morph out of control. So moving to microsegmentation or microsegmented architecture provides that opportunity to simplify. An emerging best practice that we're seeing is sort of this single consolidated policy for subnets that allows control as well as threat detection and mitigation. So instead of performing those functions in different parts of the network, everything is sort of together. And this approach ultimately reduces the attack surface and strengthens the organization's security posture. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Does it increase the complexity of management to have all these little segments?
I think depending upon the tool that you get, it can simplify it.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
If you've got a really complex set of firewall rules, then you've got some people that are just focused on that within the organization. And could you maybe use their skill set more ubiquitously instead of just managing firewall rules, you know?
Oh, forget that. I mean, I remember when we were Terramark, in order to not take down the network, we used to have very expensive network person make the change, another person to watch them. We had to have change control that would authorize the change, yada, 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 yada down the line. It was insane. And of course, you know, my company does something like this. I'm not going to make this an advertising pitch for Appgate, but yeah, you have to have something, I think, that will manage this and manage it properly. And since we're not sponsoring this show, I'm not going to make this a commercial for Appgate. But I would think that it could become overly complex if you don't have a way to manage, because you are doing so much more to finite granularity, you know, in these finite rules within the network. Right.
Yeah, and think about VMs, right? One VM host can have lots of different workloads.
Yes.
You can have various security policies that are important, or, you know, important to each of those different workloads. So how do you manage that?
That's right. That's right. Very, very good. Very good.
Maybe you can ask, you know, if you can provide some real world examples of microsegmentation and how do you implement that with customers?
Yeah, for sure. So I've seen 4 use cases lately, and they were in development and production systems, in security for soft assets, hybrid cloud management, and we sort of just touched on that, and then incident response. So let me take a minute and break them down. For development and production systems, organizations are able to separate development and test environments from production systems, and that's been going on forever. But sometimes things cross lines, right? So there's the ideal state, and then there's sometimes just what happens. So even though everyone on the team is well-meaning, sometimes developers take customer information from production databases and use it for testing. They don't mean to, but it happens, right? So microsegmentation can enforce a more disciplined separation by providing granularity. And what they do is they limit connections between environments. So this database dipping doesn't happen. And that can be really important, because you can get in a lot of trouble now with, depending on where that information is. Like if you're in the UK and you're adhering to GB, to the regulatory compliance over there, very heavy penalties for sharing customer information. Very costly penalties, right? So depending on where you are, it really matters. Security for soft assets. So back in the day, T, and you'll remember this, we used to talk about defense in depth.
Yes.
We just did. And, it's that same sort of way of thinking, right? Companies have this huge financial and reputational incentive to protect their soft assets, such as confidential customer info, like we were just talking about, employee info, maybe intellectual property, maybe their financial data, which is pretty important. And microsegmentation adds another level of security to guard against exfiltration of that data. and malicious actions, right? And I know it's not an Appgate commercial, but I know that Appgate has the ability to do that as well. So that's if you think about it, that's another form of microsegmentation that can be performed based upon allowing what you allow people to do. So behavior-based interaction with your assets, right? Hybrid cloud management. So managing one cloud is tough. Managing lots of clouds is even tougher. And sometimes the IT team just inherits that because maybe the company policy is to use hyperscaler A, but marketing went and did something on their own with hyperscaler B, and then IT found out about it because something broke.
Right.
And they never even knew that set of assets was out there, let alone was secure. And that's exactly what happens, right? So we're living in this sort of hybrid world where microsegmentation can provide seamless protection for applications that span multiple clouds, multiple environments, and it can provide uniform security policies across hybrid environments. In the case of your employer, Tina, it's a tool that says, we don't care if you've got this computer that can come onto the network. We want to make sure it's you, not your computer that's coming onto the network, right? And then incident response. So we talked a couple minutes ago about how microsegmentation limits lateral movement and lateral threats and reduces the impact of breaches. And we're seeing microsegmentation solutions help by providing log information. Who did what when? We can go back and track that, because if there's an incident, we need to know who did what when, because maybe the regulators are going to be asking us who did what when. That incident response team now has data that can help them understand what the attack tactics were, and then telemetry to sort of pinpoint policy violations to specific applications. You know, you've got people getting into maybe the corporate financials that don't need to get into the corporate financials, but you've given them an all access pass with VPN. Just, hey, kids, you're part of the environment. Go play. But maybe maybe that kid isn't big enough yet to be on that roller coaster. I don't know. So anyhow, those are some use cases that I think make sense.
Yeah, that's very, very, very good. These are some great thoughts to ponder. This week we've all heard. We're going to kind of segue here to the current topic. Joe, you can weigh in on this or not. The Colonial Pipeline. Okay, we've all seen that. I think we all thought that anything related to utilities, we're using the SCADA systems. They are untouchable. We don't have to worry about them. They're not accessed by the internet, and boom, look what happens. Any thoughts, David? Any thoughts, Joe? Otherwise, I'll just chatter on and on and on. You know I will.
Well, I can just chime in very briefly. So what's interesting, every time there is something like that happen, even a SolarWinds breach, all of a sudden there's money allocated to hiring more security professionals and so on. So this is also an event where all of a sudden I think there's going to be like more money funneled to protecting SCADA systems, and I just wish that we weren't so reactive about this, and we've done more, not waiting for for these events to occur, because this is definitely a matter of national security right there. So I don't know if there's any other thoughts there. Totally looking to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, anything you wanted to add to that? I actually feel the same way you do, David. It brings me back to the World Trade Center bombings, and right after that, everybody talked about disaster recovery and how they had to have business continuity. And I remember doing countless proposals for 2 times everything. Okay, but then when they saw the cost, it became, well, I'm not sure I need that, right? This is very different. And I think I'd like to see, I'm not a big regulation person, but I would like to see some regulatory involvement I mean, we have regulations for the power lines. Why wouldn't we have regulations for some of these other systems so that they're protected? So these companies have to do something. It's shameful that they didn't have some protections that they should have had. And what is worse is that people like us weren't worried about it because we didn't think that they were touchable. But that's another story entirely. The fact is that we're in wartime with cyber stuff right now. Everybody needs to understand that our biggest threat is not. I don't think that we're going to get hit by a nuclear bomb. I think we're going to get hit by something else, and so we all have to. We all have to assemble and figure out how we're going to all hands on deck fix this. And I don't think the general population fully understands that yet. But with more of these kinds of incidents that actually affect day-to-day life, it might. If we had an actual outage other than a pipeline. Now, the problem with that is that it does not affect, like, it's not affecting your driving today, right? It might affect it in 3 months. And then the correlation, people won't pull it together. Oh, it's, but if the power went out today and your lights were out and the air conditioning were out or the heat went out, that would be something else. And so, I think something like that has to happen for it to get very, very, very seriously funded. Mm-hmm. Just my opinion. Anyway, I always have to give food for thought on our show, and I'm so grateful that David allows me to do that. Joe, you are so awesome, and I'm so grateful that you are here. Why don't you let the audience know how to find you if they want to ask more
questions? Again, thank you both for having me. It was fun. I am on Twitter, where I talk about cloud and cybersecurity, and I'm Digital Cloud Gal. And then I'm on LinkedIn as well, where I post very silly pet videos to accompany a cybersecurity theme of the day. So yeah,
it's a wonderful way to learn. I'm getting by osmosis my CISSP because I enjoy the videos so much. David and I will be back 2 weeks from today with another wonderful woman. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Trish, David?
Well, maybe, you have more background. I speak to her all the time, but, and she's involved in so many different things. I think maybe what we'll do is we'll kind of table that to the next session.
Okay. All right. Okay. But we're going to talk about what it's like to sell and market cybersecurity solutions. So it will tie into what's going on, what we're talking about today. I think it'd be really interesting to hear the kind of objections and the kind of pushback she gets. And she isn't always dealing with large companies. So I'm really excited to hear about what happens when you go into a smaller company or a mid-sized company, and what kind of concerns and questions and pushback you get when you're trying to get them to protect themselves. I think it's going to be very telling. So we'll look forward to seeing you back here in 2 weeks live with us here at the Cyber Spot. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. See you guys all soon. Take care.